Hello and welcome to Challenger Safety, the fourth stage of psychological safety, which is really the top level, how you know if your team has psychological safety and if you know your team is high performing or not, because psychological safety is not about getting along, being nice, stuff like that. It's actually about that rewarded vulnerability. Rewarded vulnerability is actually the definition of psychological safety, and challenger safety requires us to have friction. And we're going to go over the specific types of friction because we want creative friction and intellectual friction, but we don't want a lot of social friction, because teams that aren't high performing have a lot of social friction, and that those are teams that are based on like you know uh, simple cohesion or simple friendships, things like that. There can be friction there. So we want to talk about the good kind of friction, so we can move forward and become that high performing team. And then at the end of this, we're just going to bundle it all together and really dive in and see what makes that high performing team. So it's myself, George Hanshaw, Kenna Miller, Alyssa Imes, and Victoria Bai are here to run through the four stages of psychological safety, or the fourth stage of psychological safety, challenger safety. So really, challenger safety, it satisfies a basic human need to make things better. You feel safe if you're in a good environment. You feel safe to speak up and challenge the status quo when you think there's an opportunity to improve. One of our favorite terms on the team is grandma's ham. We don't want to eat grandma's ham. I think we actually told that story in inclusion safety about grandma's ham. But we want to be able to challenge from a healthy perspective. So, from your perspective, what does it look like to be able to challenge something, um, and not create that social friction, but create that good? And we're going to go into what social friction is later, but create that good intellectual or creative friction that helps us all to grow. What does that kind of look like on a team?
I think that when you bring something to your team and your team members are able to ask questions rather than shut your idea down, that is what opens up conversation for you to feel safe in your environment to have different ideas. So I think the questioning part is a big piece.
Oh, so questioning it, and that kind of loops back to, I love the way you answered that, because that kind of loops back to a lot of the stuff in inclusion safety,
Mm-hmm.
right? How you're part of the team and you feel able to um, come to work fully as yourself. That's a great point. So that kind of illustrates how you have to have to build upon the four stages. It doesn't mean that they're literal. They don't go in a straight line sometimes. There we go. That's better. Uh, Linear. There we go. That's the word. I was mixing up linear and literal at the same time. I was making up my own words. Uh, so even if it doesn't go perfectly in that straight line, sometimes you go back and forth, but you have to build on each other, because that
Mm-hmm.
sounded very familiar, right? Yeah. Hmm. Cool. All right. So that's what challenger safety basically is. You're able to challenge that status quo and put up the challenge flag. Um, when did they add that to the NFL? The red flag, the challenge flag. That was at least 4 years ago, wasn't it? When they added that. Okay, so we can throw up the challenge flag at any time, and it's okay, because it allows us to talk things through, right? If we're not able to talk things through and explain things well, then you know what? We don't know enough about it to really think it's a good idea or not. So if somebody on the team that challenges it, that's great, because that gives you an opportunity to better explain or to learn something new. And if you're a leader, go in thinking that everybody in the room is smarter than you are, and you will be a-okay, because you'll strive for understanding. So that's the overall definition of challenger safety. So let's see what happens next with it as we look through it. And as a leader, our job is to give that air cover in exchange for candor. So candor means people speak their mind, but it doesn't mean that they overtake conversations, right? So it's kind of, everything is dichotomy. You can't go too far one way or the other. But as a leader, that's your job as part of being that air cover, right? So you make sure that people feel okay to speak with candor. And I forget, does anybody remember the author of the book Radical Candor? Oh, me either. So I'll put that in the description later as we get here. So speak with radical candor, and that helps create that friction, that good friction, intellectual and creative friction that makes us all better. So what do you think about, have you all ever been in a position where you couldn't speak your mind? Vic's shaking her head,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, sorry,
Go
Vic.
for it.
Do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Penna. I'll go after.
Okay. Yes, I previously worked for an organization where candor was not necessarily appreciated just because of the way that things are done. So they didn't really want their employees to go against the grain or try something new or deviate from whatever the path that was, directed to them was. So I definitely think it's important to give the air cover to your employees so that they do feel free to speak with candor and to share their thoughts in their mind. Especially from a leadership perspective, a lot of times leaders are not always in the weeds with every single employee. So the employee has a unique experience and can bring that knowledge to a lot of the decisions that are being made. So by providing that air cover and making sure that employees feel free to share and like they are not going to be, ridiculed or told no right off the bat, and that they are going to have at least team members that will give their thoughts consideration and all of those things, like George mentioned, achieving all of the other levels and stages of psych safety. It really leads to better outcomes overall.
I love the way you said employees have a unique experience, and they do. That's why it's so incredibly important to listen to that voice, to listen to the employee voice, because they know what the problem is. And a lot of times they know the best way to fix it. And it's only our ego that gets in the way if we don't listen to them. I think in contributor safety, we chatted a little bit about putting our ego at the door with the worry tree, the ego tree. I think we were talking about, yeah. So that, I love that point that you made. So we by doing that, we're showing value, that we value their experience, we value their perspective. And when we value their experience and perspective, that's a direct link to valuing the individual as a whole. That's a great point. Thank you for that. Vic, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, definitely. I love how you mentioned value, experience, and the employee as individuals, and that everyone has the unique set of skills and opportunities to bring forth towards a team. Because I was just thinking back and comparing with the last two organizations, how they were opposites, where one was a lot of bureaucracy, like everything had to get approved, and most of the time you'll get shut down because it's their way or the highway. And fortunately, I do have another organization where it was opposite to an extent. I had to get approval, but the importance with my leader there, he valued my experience, and he's like, well, you are more techie and you know all the latest trends and gadgets for education, and he allowed me to implement this video program we had because what's the best way for teenagers to get excited about learning? Let them use TikTok. That's an educational TikTok though.
Right.
It's an educational tech program but you make it feel like TikTok, and suddenly it's a whole shift in learning, and you could see the increase in engagement, and of course over time it trickled down to increase in scores and learning. But it all because I did have to step into a principal's office as, may I implement this tool before? And because he valued each of us as teachers and educators, because he knows that we're the expert level in our subject and our skills.
Right.
No, it's not one way, my way or the highway. It's be innovative and challenge it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And if you're a leader and you have the my way or the highway mentality, you can't be surprised when people take the highway. You know, you just can't, because that's a direct byproduct of that. Um, when I worked for Lockheed Martin, it was a school day, so we had a whole bunch of schools coming in, and every different department, every different team had something out in the parking lot that was fun to do. And we had this one where it was, well, we had a whole bunch of stuff, but one of the things was it was a plastic cup about this big that was on a piece of PVC that went back with a spring, and then it would launch. Right. So it was an airplane throwing contest that we had. So we put a piece of tape out for the team that went the furthest. And what kind of stuck in my mind forever, and this was a long time ago, was this engineer was going around, and he was having a good time. He was obviously an intelligent individual. And we said, hey, why don't you we thought he'd make the best paper airplane, right? Because he's an aerospace engineer. And you know what he did? Does anybody want to take a wild guess at what he did? He took the piece of paper, crumpled it into a ball, put it in the bucket, and launched it. And it flew far. So I did not see that coming. I did not see that happening at all. Thankfully, a few other people came by that made airplanes and went further. But that was one of the things that stuck in my mind about being innovative. Yeah, you have to think. And at first, when he started doing that, we were like, okay, that's kind of rude, but let's see what happens. But it was brilliant, right? So change our paradigm, change our perspective is what we should do. So I thought that was just that kind of blew my mind as far as being innovative. So that's exchanging that air cover for candor. Give people the opportunity, and if somebody comes in to stop it, that's when you come in and provide that cover, and do it in a way that builds relationships with people. Don't do it in that way that detracts from relationships with others, because that is our goal. So we want to apply that air cover, firm, but kindness goes a long way. And then how do we do that? What's interesting here is to get to that peak, to get to that flag, we have to have divergent thinking. So that's the engineer that created the rock from the paper and just checked it out. Creative abrasion. So that's that friction that we have. Constructive dissent, and then tolerance for candor. So we want to have people. So Alyssa, yes, or in the contributor safety, you talked about assigning a devil's advocate role. How do you see that kind of fitting in with the constructive dissent role?
So I think a big part of it is having trust. Because when you have trust, you know that you can be creative and you can participate. So, and I think along with trust comes respect. If you feel respected, then that trust kind of starts to be built in, and that allows your team to be able to do all the things that you want them to do. But without that, then they're going to shut down and kind of remove themselves from the situation. So I think by building a firm foundation of trust and respect, that everything else starts to kind of just fall into place.
Yeah, it really does. So, and that's the neat thing. Let's talk about trust for a sec, because trust is cool. Because here's a nerd thing for psychological safety for anybody, if they want to hear the nerd fact for it. Trust is absolutely a part of psychological safety. It is a big piece of it, and it is felt individually, right? So that's felt on an individual level. Trust is. Now, psychological safety, the reason why we can't say that, and I'm not saying that you did because you didn't, but trust is not psychological safety. It's a huge piece of it, but psychological safety is felt at a team level. Now that's kind of weird to me when I first heard that. I was like, well, how do we feel something as a team? Well, it's an overall view because you can have different individuals on the team that feel trust or different levels of trust, I guess we could say, right? And then, so if you don't have trust on your team, you will never have that overall feeling of psychological safety with it. And that's kind of that connection point that I want to make sure is clear for everybody out here watching this, because without trust, you can't build psychological safety because the individual has to feel safe prior to the entire team feeling that they're covered as well. So it's kind of cool. That was a nerd fact of the day for psychological safety. So
I mean, I think it's a great point to make. And I guess an example I can give is, so Kenna and I were friends prior to working together. So we have, a level of trust. But if we're in a
Right.
group setting in a meeting, even though I trust her, if I don't trust everybody else, I'm not going to speak up. So you need to have a team level of trust, not just individual levels of trust.
yeah, right. So what happens if you and Kenna are friends, but you don't feel able to speak up in a meeting with all these other folks?
Mm-hmm.
That's how that back channel conversation starts to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that can just tear a team apart really quick. I think we've all probably unfortunately seen that happen from time to time on different teams. But yeah, that's a great point. That is a fantastic point, actually. So that's that constructive dissent. And how about tolerance for candor? What do we think that kind of means, tolerance for candor? Because that can mean something different for different individuals as well.
I think that tolerance for candor overall is just kind of an understanding of everyone on the team that it is okay to share your, your thoughts or opinions about whatever the topic is, and you're not scared of any repercussions or, feeling like your idea is not good enough. And I think we mentioned it before, but the idea of asking questions or gaining more clarity on the situation, I feel like that is also a form of candor because, not only are you gaining clarity for yourself, but other people on the team might have the same type of questions, or it might just allow the idea to expand and you're all able to explore it to a greater level as well. So overall, I'd kind of describe it as an overarching tolerance and I guess feeling that it is okay to share your ideas and to speak your mind.
Yeah, so that what would it look like if there was no tolerance for candor? How would the leader act? I'm trying to wrap that in my head. What would that kind of look like?
I could see a leader that would shut down all of your ideas. So I think having candor is when your leader protects, your right to speak. So if that's not there, then I could see a leader that just like shuts down all of your ideas.
Probably. So along with that, shutting it down, that kind of can come across a bit angry too.
Yeah.
He's angry. Right? Kind of like Shrek, right? He's angry.
Kind of like stuck in their ways too. Like you're shut down, you can't be creative, you can't innovate. So you kind of are just doing whatever you're supposed to do, and you can't like exceed that.
That great points, because if somebody is feeling shut down, they're not bringing their entire self to work, and there's no real growth within that organization, within that team. The team is just kind of hanging out and doing exactly what they need to do to not be bothered, right? That can kind of hurts the soul when you're not allowed to challenge and do things differently. Especially today, they say that 75% of the workforce is disengaged to some point, which is a huge number. Imagine if the workforce was 75% engaged. That would be incredible. The things that we could come up with as a nation, as a world, that would be amazing. Kind of incredible to me. So that is and divergent thinking. Anybody seen the movie series Divergent? Oh, great series. But they have a team that's called Divergent. It kind of reminds me of us sometimes where we think it's just a little bit different in a good way, right? So the divergent thinking is just allowing people that space to be curious and wonder, what if, think differently. And as a leader, the key is to really foster that, and to foster it, ask for it. What's an out of the box idea? That's kind of an overused term, but what is a total, complete different way of thinking about this? Because a lot of times if we're not thinking about or a lot of times we're thinking so close to the problem that we're trying to find solutions within the problem. And a solution is never within the problem. It's always outside of the problem. So that divergent thinking helps us get outside of the problem, get outside of the issue, and think for multiple ways to come up with solutions. And that's kind of the way I think about that divergent thinking. Any other thoughts before we hit the next slide? The next group of thoughts? All right, let's hit that next one. How do you know if it's safe to challenge the status quo? Question of the day. And do you think that it is different per team? Are there some similarities? Are there some? What do you think? Kenny, you're shaking your head. I would love to hear your thoughts.
I do think that it's different per team, and it may look a little different even depending on the industry or the company culture itself. But I would say some things overall that are hopefully true are, no fear from your teammates or even higher up individuals that you're going to get, shut down or negative feedback. And I also think it's the type of response you get when you do share, is your team welcoming of different ideas? Are you immediately shut down, or are your ideas talked through and really considered in your conversations with your team? And kind of just how does your team environment feel, and how does your team and your leader react when you do speak up and you do challenge what the status quo is? So I think it's a mix of things, but like I said, I think it probably looks and feels maybe a little different depending on the team itself and kind of that environment that has been created.
Oh, nice. So kind of that, you brought up the point about it being authentically, people think about it in an authentic way. So they legitimately give that divergent thinking some actual thought, some actual credibility. Because that's a huge point. Because just like our main job is to build authentic relationships. When people have divergent thinking, I actually worked at a place where it felt like if you came up with an idea that wasn't part of the status quo, it was like when you were a kid, somebody just pat you on the head and say, "Oh yeah, good job, buddy," and then, get out of here, kind of thing. So when it's not authentic, when you don't legitimately consider what other people are saying, they feel it. They just like making a relationship just to get something out of that relationship. People can smell it from a mile away when it happens. Same thing when they come up with ideas. I love the way you put that. Yes, absolutely. And it feels horrible when people don't do it authentically. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not 4. Yeah, absolutely. Vic, did you want to add anything to that?
I was just thinking how earlier in the conversation we talked about this not being linear, because it all goes full circle on from the get-go. Did you experience inclusion safety? If that wasn't present, most likely you would have shut down and threw on a hard shell and just chug along your way and not have to worry about saying the wrong thing, feel like doing the wrong action, and not say, and just go with the flow essentially.
All right, so Vic just won the analogy of the program with that one. So now, we'll call it. So if we're not providing any of the, or like we're not applying giving inclusion safety, contributor safety, or learner safety, contributor safety, and challenger safety, then the person's going to do what? They're going to turtle. So we're going to call it turtling. I love that. So that you just won the analogy of the program award. We're going. So if we're not offering that on our own team, we're gonna call people are turtling because they're getting in their shell so they don't get hammered. I love that.
It's a great pun, George. I didn't think of it.
So we're gonna no turtling on the team. If your teammates are turtling, something's wrong. That's awesome. All right, what's next? Oh, here's that friction, intellectual friction and social friction. Intellectual friction is great. We love that because that drives ideas. And the reason why intellectual friction is fantastic is because the intellectual friction, okay, here's an idea that's been thrown out, a way to solve a problem, whatever it may be, then team members pile on top of it. They change it, they adjust it, they add to it, they subtract from it, and it grows, it becomes better. So it's kind of like the initial idea was just a seed and then it belonged to the whole team. So it grew in that garden where we cultivated, watered, made sure the soil had nutrients, all of that stuff. And it grew in a way where we could have that friction. We could have that, no, that I don't think that'll work because sometimes this issue over here happens. Okay, well, fair enough. So how do we mitigate that? And then you have all these good conversations that are about the products, that are focused on the product. The minute you get into social frictions, that friction is focused on the individual, and that never turns out well. You have to keep that focus on the concept, the idea, the solution, not the individual person. Did you see George? He wore that shirt 2 days in a row? That's social friction. That's also gossip. Not good. Not good whatsoever. They always come up with crazy ideas that'll never work. I wish they'd just be quiet. That's social friction. And those are very overt ways that it happens. But there's also that stuff that really subversively happens too, when the backbiting, the lack of support, things like that happen as well. What are some of your thoughts about the intellectual or social friction?
What comes to mind for me is something that you said a long time, George, which is if you have assumptions, then you should be asking questions. So I think to avoid that social friction, assumptions are natural and they're always going to happen. But if you sit in those thoughts and you don't ask questions, I think that's where the friction will start. So start asking questions because that will avoid the friction. If that makes sense.
I love that. So there's been a theme in all of these streams that we've done where curiosity can really cure a lot, right? A lot of what gets in our way of being curious is, I like the way you brought that up. So if you so we have to have a certain amount of self-awareness, right? So if you have an assumption, challenge it. Role model it, challenge your own assumptions. That's a great point. All right, I like that. And the way that we've gone through a whole lot of content over these 4 weeks. So if there's just one takeaway that anybody wants, I guess it would be curious. That's kind of the main one. And don't be a turtle. Be curious. Don't be a turtle. Right. Okay, I'll stop. I'm sorry. All right. So really that curiosity, because the next slide that's coming up is we're going to be talking about being the architect, because you are the cultural architect for your team. So what is culture? And I love the way, and this came straight from the Leader Factor team. They actually put this together. But a pattern of thought or behavior in a person's a habit. So we personally have a habit, a pattern of thought or behavior in a team is a norm. So we have a lot of team norms, and then a collection of norms within an organization is the culture. So if you want to affect the culture of your organization, start with your patterns of thought and behavior. So that kind of brings that extreme ownership piece that we talk about all the time full circle, because if you want to be that cultural architect of your team, of the organization, start with yourself. And that means always starting with yourself. So if you are years down the road on creating psychological safety, continue to challenge yourself, be that challenger. And then if you're in a team, challenge those team norms, challenge them. So that's a big part of challenger safety as well, is to challenge team norms. Because once you challenge that norm, then that becomes part of that larger culture that you're creating as well. So if you think that just because you're a team member, you can't change culture, you can't. You just have to start with changing your own thought process and behavior and being very purposeful about it, helping that get to a team level, which is a norm, and then helping that norm reach the organization level, which is the culture. So that's kind of cool that we all have that opportunity to do that. Any thoughts on that? I kind of went off. So do anybody want to add something to that? I took up all the time. Sorry.
I think you said it all, George. Everything
All right.
that you said. So I encourage everybody to, continue challenging the norms and work to make your team psychologically safe.
And so to create psychological safety, it's, if you want to go to the next slide, the most important factor is the leader modeling the behavior, and just period. That is the most important factor. Now, what if you don't have a leader who's modeling that behavior and you're trying to adjust their behaviors to kind of help, right? So you're an informal leader. The one thing that you can do to affect the behavior of the leader is to build that relationship with them, find out what they need. Like if it's somebody that just incredibly micromanages, find out why they're micromanaging so much, and then fill that gap, that perceived gap that they have prior to them being able to micromanage you. So be more proactive. That'll take the stress away from them, right? They'll still need that gap filled in whatever way, but that's a very tangible way that you can start affecting their behavior. And then as they know that they're going to have all this before they even need it, then you can then go to the next step and be like, hey, because we're going to use your word, Alyssa, you're building trust with them, with that leader, as you're delivering everything before they even need it. You're building trust with them. So once that trust is built, then you can start taking withdrawals from that bank account. And you can say, hey, what do you think about, wouldn't it be great if, and always, so you're not spending too much from that bank account, flip it around so it's their idea. I know you need to have all this information, and we're getting it to you right away, which is fantastic. Another way that, what do you think about if we did this, or we tried this and it gave you, and then, more income potential on this one product line or something like that, because it would be opening up that. What do you think? Do you like the idea of opening more product lines? What's your thought? And then get them to come back, because they won't initially put it down as a no, because you want their wisdom. So if they have a big ego, that's how you just utilize that so they can make better decisions for the team. And that's one way to do it really quickly. So any last thoughts about being an architect for your team before we jump out of here? Because you all have, so what's the, real quick, so in the last couple seconds here, Alyssa, you're on the top of the screen, so we're going to start with you. We're going to go Alyssa, Kenna, and then Vic. What is the most important thing in your perspective, your terms, no right or wrong? What's the most important thing for creating psychological safety, either to create it or the reason why?
I think the most important thing is, as a leader, to demonstrate it to your team. And when you make mistakes, just own up to it and explain to your team what you could do differently next time. That way you're showing them that they're able to make mistakes too.
Oh, awesome. Kenna, you're up.
Oh man, there are so many things I could say. I think one of the most important things, though, is to trust your employees if you are a leader, and if you are just an employee, trust your other coworkers and your leader as well. And the second thing is to give your employees space to be creative and help them align their passions or whatever they really care about with their work, because they'll be way more invested and you'll get such a better product or result.
Awesome. Great stuff. Vic.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes in mine, but similar to yours, Kenneth, it's to have trust and respect for your employees. You have trust that they're professionals, they're great, they're smart, they know what they're doing, and they're innovative, of grand ideas, as well as have an open mind, because there's one, you trust them, but also be a listener, be open-minded, be there when they need it to either provide feedback, to listen, to brainstorm ideas, and so forth. So trust, respect, and have an open mind and open door, literal or figuratively.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for the 4 weeks of psychological safety that we went through. Appreciate all of your input. Oh, fire truck's behind me. Nice. Just appreciate all the work that you do to create psych safety on our team, which is absolutely amazing. So shall we count us out? We haven't hit it quite right yet. Who wants to count today?
You count it, George.
Oh man, here we go on 3. 1, 2, 3.
This
is
what
what learning feels like.
We tried.
Fast forward 10 years from now, we still won't get it.
We're just like a millisecond close.
We're getting better each time. Well, thank you all, and thanks everybody that participated in the course. Have a great week.